Man merkt im Buch an, zwar sowohl im Original und auch Toms Lesung, dass es there is rhythm and there is music in it, and it all kind of goes back to musical roots.
That's the fun of what we're doing, because not only do we have Josef, who is a great actor, but he is also a very fine musician too. So you will hear the musicality of this language both in English and in German tonight.
But he didn't answer my question.
What was it?
If he knew Kinsey before this book.
I have heard of him. That was all. I didn't know anything in particular. I have seen the movie actually, the Bill Condon movie, and Tom can tell you more about that because it pretty much came out at the same time, right? Yeah. So I knew a little bit. And wer war das in Deutschland? Der Kinsey in Deutschland?
Also es gab ein Buch.
Kolle oder Oswald Kolle oder wer war das hier? Wer hat diesen Part übernommen?
Ja, vielleicht. Aber ich kannte ihn. Es gab im Westen in der DDR ein Buch, das hieß Liebe und Sex bis 30, Love and Sex until 30. Und da tauchten erstaunlicherweise diese Kinsey-Statistiken auch auf, also völlig aus dem Zusammenhang gerissen, aber trotzdem spannend.
Ich kann mich auch erinnern, übrigens an ein Buch. Tom knows the story already. I found it on the bookshelf of my mother's. Und das war ein Buch, da waren ungefähr 187 Stellungen drin. Gezeichnet und kurz beschrieben. Und das Einzige, woran ich mich erinnern kann, war, dass bei, ich würde sagen, 99% aller dieser zum Teil sehr akrobatischen Stellungen drunter stand der Hinweis, schonend für den Mann.
See, I can understand all this because we've already discussed it while we were backstage and you were suffering out here without us. I didn't know anything about Kinsey either. I had barely heard of him before I started researching and doing this project. And as long as you mentioned this film of Bill Condon's, Kinsey, the book and the movie have nothing to do with one another. We two artists were just working on the same material, and of course the presentation is very, very different. Bill, who became a friend of mine because of this, and I have been on stage together and discussed how two artists would deal with the same material, and he's making a biography of Kinsey, and I'm not. As you'll see, my book is narrated by one of Kinsey's inner circle, a young man by the name of John Milk, whom you'll be introduced to in a minute, who has spent his whole life working as a sexologist. Now, I don't know about you when you go to college. We have to choose a major in college when we go to college. What are you going to major in? What's going to be your field? And I think very, very few people say, I'm going to be a sexologist. So it interested me to wonder about what is it going to be like for a guy to work with Dr. Kinsey and conduct these intimate surveys of men and women about their sex lives. I mean, how does his wife feel about it? For instance, he's out every night on the streets talking to prostitutes to find out about their sex life. It just was such an interesting kind of concept. So that's one of the things that got me going on this book to begin with.
John Milk, it's a strange name, Milk. It sounds like Milch, like
yes.
Innocence, like
yes.
Greenhorn, like, you know, we have this German expression, Milchreisbubi. Like rice pudding boy.
Good. Well, all these connotations come through. Sometimes you choose a name for a character that is simply a name, and sometimes it has some meaning in the story. And of course, that is what we're getting from John Milk, and the readers will decide for themselves. And I'm beginning to think, Marion, that it's time for us to do our thing.
Okay, also, Sie lesen jetzt die beiden. T.C.Boyle liest The Inner Circle, Josef Liefers, die deutsche Übersetzung, also wunderbare deutsche Übersetzung von Dirk van Gunsteren, Dr. Sex. Viel Spaß.
As I said, Josef and I will read to you consecutively, but first I'd like to introduce the book a little bit and set up what I'm going to do for you. The book I'm using an historical figure of Dr. Kinsey, and all of the material about Dr. Kinsey is true to the facts as far as I know it. He was an entomologist, a world-renowned entomologist, an expert of the gall wasp. This is the little flightless wasp that makes galls on your rose bush and your oak tree. He was approximately 40 years old when he began his sex studies. He was a professor, an eminent professor at the University of Indiana in Bloomington, Indiana. And he was teaching zoology. But during the 1930s, there had been a venereal disease epidemic in America, especially among young people. And there had been no marriage courses or sexual manuals or anything available. So students around the country began to militate for having a marriage course. And they came to their biology professor, Dr. Kinsey, and asked him to conduct it, which he did with gusto. He felt that the poets had had 2,000 years to tell us about romance. Now he, Dr. Kinsey, a scientist, was going to tell us about the physiology of sexual relations in the human animal. And he always called us the human animal, which I think is so touching, don't you? He wanted to give us a very mechanistic approach to what sex is without regard to any emotion, which is another thing that interested me when I wanted to begin this project. Is that possible? Even in the most casual sexual encounter, can you do it without emotion? In doing my research, by the way, I read the 4 extant biographies of Kinsey. And in talking with Bill Condon, by the way, why is there a book and a movie on the same subject around now? I think it's because there were 2 biographies that came out in the late 90s, both of which revealed what Kinsey was like behind closed doors. To the public, all these years, even though he's been largely forgotten, as Josef and I can attest, we barely knew who he was. Nonetheless, in his time, he was enormously famous. And he presented himself as perfectly normal. He was married, he had 3 children. He insisted that the members of his inner circle, his fellow researchers, be married and have children and present a perfectly normal front to the world, because otherwise who could believe his findings if he were engaged personally? But now, in the 90s, it came out that he was a sexual enthusiast up the first stripe and would eagerly have sex with anything that crawled on this earth, and did, in multiple combinations. And of course, this is why there's a movie and a book, because it's such juicy stuff. And I guess I should give you an example or two. I don't want to horrify or disgust you or make anyone run screaming from the theater, but he did get a little extreme. He devised a scale of 0 to 6. 0 being purely heterosexual and 6 being purely homosexual. And he was married all his life and loved his wife. Nonetheless, he was very much bisexual, and toward the end of his life, he was more and more interested in homosexual relations and probably would have rated himself perhaps at 4.5 on this scale, finally. He began to, in the course of his researches, questioning people, he would go to gay bathhouses, he would go to sororities, all these places where sex really takes place, and question people about their sexual behavior or lack of it. One experiment that he did, quite famously, was to have film 1,000 men masturbating. Now, why would he do this? Well, because there's a scientific reason for it. It was thought in the medical literature that in order for conception to occur, men had to ejaculate forcefully. So he paid these men $2 each, and he filmed them. He wanted to determine how many men ejaculate forcefully and how many just dribble. Please take heart, you dribblers of the audience, because 73% of men, according to Kinsey, dribbled. At any rate, he paid these guys. They were in a photographer's studio in New York City. A big line of them outside the door, maybe some magazines in the empty room to stimulate them. They'd come in one at a time, lie down there on an increasingly damp rug. The photographer was on them, and they went at their business. This is a true anecdote, which I include in the book, by the way. During the course of this, maybe it's the 100th guy, he's going at it, and nothing is happening. So Kinsey leaned in and said, "Would you please just come now?" You see, this is the kind of rich material we're dealing with here, folks. The